Hi, class. In this lecture, we are going to do a quick overview of defining death, the last stage of development. So, when it comes to defining death, the answer used to be pretty straightforward. We knew that death was when the heart stopped beating, breathing ceased, and the person failed to react to environmental stimuli. However, modern medical technology has complicated this because we have terminally ill individuals that are kept alive for extended periods of times. Brain damage caused by cardiac arrest leaves someone can leave someone in a kind of paralysis type state, but they're still not technically dead. We still have some kind of brain activity, some type of bodily functions going on. It's just not in that normal way that we are moving about, right? Terry Shivo, back in the 1990s, maybe some of you guys have heard of her case. She was where the question of defining death really became a social issue because she had some kind of brain damage and was left in a persistent vegetative state. And basically, that what that means is that all of those higher cortical functions, ability to think, ability to feel, it's just all of it has stopped. Once again, you're basically brain dead. So, all that's going on is kind of the bodily functions of breathing, that basic, most basic of stasis. And so she didn't seem to be improving, and so her parents, basically, long story short, they wanted to pull her off of life support because being she was in the hospital for years, and of course, there is a point where insurance will stop paying for things, and things just get really complicated when it comes to these matters. And so Terry Shivo's parents, of course, they had hoped that she was going to get better, she was going to wake up, but her husband argued that she had no quality of life and wanted to pull the plug. So, like I said, huge ordeal, huge media blow up over this case. And in 2005, the courts did rule in favor of the husband, and the feeding tube was removed. And so then Terry Shivo, eventually passed away. And so it just leads us back to then, what do we define as death? Oh, and this also, Terry Shivo's case is also a hot topic when it comes to a physician assistant suicide, because technically what they did was it's a type of euthanasia, by removing that feeding tube. You're assisting in you're willingly doing that, knowing that that person is going to die from that. So it's a hot topic when it comes to physician assisted suicide and philosophy. We talk about that in my philosophy course. So we see now, because of technology, because we have these machines that can note brain activity, we do now have trouble defining death, because it's not just stop breathing, heart stop beating. There are times, now we have to consider death by the brain. When we see no signs of brain activity, that's then now what we define as death. And so when it comes to these cases, so like these people in these vegetative coma type states, they believe that they are indeed brain dead, and that physician assistant suicide, passive euthanasia, is acceptable ways of helping those people move on to the next life, if indeed there is one, right? We don't know. So, when it comes to dying, little was known about the process of death and dying, because it's such a taboo topic to discuss. And a lot of times we would even see that physicians, they used to not disclose terminal illness to patients because of the fact that it would upset them. And then in 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was came up. Not came up, but she wrote a book called On Death and Dying. So she was the first one to really tackle the issue of dying. And she wrote this book because she believed that the emotional needs of dying patients in the hospitals were being neglected. And so, it kind of upset at some of the medical college and staff, but, a lot of the patients, they were really happy to be able to talk about what was going on with them as they were facing their impending death. And so, because of these interviews, and of course, the medical community, they were kind of apprehensive to let her interview those patients because they felt like it would upset them too, right? Not only would it upset everybody else, but it's going to upset the people that are directly impacted by it. And so, based on these interviews, Kubler-Ross came up with 5 stages of dying. You have the denial stage, we have the anger stage, we have the bargaining stage, the depression stage, and then finally the acceptance stage. And really what we find is that people who can work through that, there are ways that you can work through those stages without physically dying. So there are a type of the psychological therapies with ketamine. Basically, ketamine, it'll make you trip, hallucinate, and so the psychologist takes you on this ketamine trip, and you go through those 5 stages of death. You may even go through they'll take you through a guided visualization where you actually experience your death, experience your funeral, like go through all of it. And it's all about coming to that acceptance stage, because even with the terminal diagnosis, once again, integrity and despair comes into play. Even if you're given 3 days to live, you can sit around and cry about it for 3 days, or you can still, get up and live your life. That sounded a little harsh, sorry guys. But the point is, don't let it get you down. We should, live every moment of our life like it is the last and enjoy it the best that we can. And so people who have terminal illness, terminal diagnosis, people who are close to death, it's really important to keep them in a positive state of mind. And then when it comes to these stages of death, unlike, just like anything else in life, it does have its criticism. And so some of the criticism is that not everybody is going to experience those, and there may be other emotions that people experience. And I would say, well, yes, I think though that for the most part, those 5 stages they really encompass quite a bit of feelings we can have. And once again, they're a good guide for helping people who have these terminal diagnoses cope with it, because that's kind of a lot about what life is about, right? It's just that idea coping with it and trying to cope with it the most positive and productive way that we can. And because of Kubler-Ross's work, death is not such a taboo topic now. So, regardless of if we go through all those stages of grief during dying or when faced with a terminal illness, we do know that grief plays a role in the dying process, right? Be it the person who is experiencing that or the ones who are close to that person. Grief is a normal part of the dying process when we lose somebody, So modern theologists, and those are people who study death in humans, have identified 4 different types of grief. So we have normal grief, and this is just, the shock of, learning that someone has passed away you care about, you're crying, you have your shock, you kind of grieve, where, you kind of feel maybe a little lost. Life was lost a little meaning. I remember when my dad passed away, my sisters and I all definitely felt all of these things here with normal grief. We had all those dreams. We had, things like that. And, eventually within a year's time, you kind of, grief gets a little easier to cope with. And, I still miss my dad. It's still been now 10, 11 years. No, it hadn't been that long. It was back in, well, maybe it has been. It was back in 12 or 13, 013 when he passed away. So it still hurts. But you do eventually learn to cope with those feelings and with those loss. And eventually, you tend to, that feeling of grief tends to give away more so to those positive memories of the person you have. And then next we have complicated, prolonged, or morbid grief. And it varies from normal grief in that, and you really just don't cope with that loss. And there are lots of cues there. You're going to have a deep depression. There's going to be a lot of normal activities that person is not going to be involved in anymore. And it's accompanied with intense, severe depression. And we can see other mental disorders evolve as well. Third, we have anticipatory grief. And this usually is before the death occurs. And it's usually people who have some kind of terminal, life-threatening injury. People who have something to where they know that their time of death is coming probably before it should. You guys know what I mean? So, like somebody with AIDS, they would probably have experience some type of anticipatory grief. Somebody who is told they have cancer, and can't the type of cancer that can't be cured, and they're gonna experience some anticipatory grief. Maybe even something of dementia, Parkinson's. There's gonna be some anticipatory relief with there. And there is a myth that anticipatory grief replaces that grief once the death has occurred. And, that's kind of controversial because it's controversial because some people think that maybe this grief doesn't occur, and then they think it's a myth because they're still going to be grieving from loved ones after that death. So it's a little hard to say. And then once again, guys, everybody is a little different. We're all individuals, and so the way that we cope with death and dying is going to vary just a little bit for all of us. And then last, we have maturational or anniversary grief, and this would be like when the date. On the date that person passed away, maybe you experience a little bit of sadness that day, and so it's triggered. And those are like a trigger day. And for the most part, it's emotionally intense, but it's very short lived. And once again, we're able to replace that feeling of sadness with the happy memories of our dead loved ones, right? And then when it comes to grief, we also have to look at mourning, and mourning and grief go hand in hand. And mourning is a little more interesting, I think, because mourning relates more to cultural, religious practice, whereas grief, and those different types of grief we talked about are related more to like a personality traits, right? So mourning practices are really exemplary of culture and religious beliefs, and a big part of that has to do with the social rules and expectations of how you behave when a loved one has passed away. So here in Western society, our typical mourning practice is you have maybe a viewing of the body, and then you have the funeral. There'll be some kind of funeral procession, and you go to the graveside, and then you do, a ceremony at the grave, and then, you do the ceremonial. The family members put flowers and throw the first little piles of dirt onto the coffin, and so and then usually family, then everybody gets together afterward, and there's some type of eating involved, right? With humans in all cultures, you usually pair food is a big part of a culture. It's a big part of socialization. So even in times of grief, we still have that cultural universal, because it's a way to help the ones that are still alive deal with that loss, right? And so I'm not going to sit here and read all of this slide to you guys. We will talk about this a little bit in our discussions too. We'll talk about some different mourning practices. So I encourage you to read this slide and read about these different practices, and in thinking of that, maybe try to see if you can find other cultures and some of the practices. I don't think I've posted it in class yet, the question asking for mourning practices. But I will be posting that, and it's definitely interesting to look into. And so that wraps up our lecture. This is the continuation of our late adulthood lecture. So we know aging happens to all of us. There's no way to avoid death. Yet, like I said, with more medical technology and just technology in general, we are definitely getting more specific and able to look more at the cellular level of things and figure out what's going on there, look more at our genes to figure out what's going on there, and eventually we'll figure out how to stop that cellular degeneration. And like I said in the late adulthood lecture, or earlier this lecture, that eventually we will find that so-called fountain of youth. And, aging, death, these are natural parts of our life and development. And I think the key to development at any stage is that we're always learning and growing. Never give up. Challenges come to us, stress comes to us, but we also have really great things that come to us too. And then we always have those real long lulls in the middle of those positive and negatives, where those long lulls where it seems like nothing is going on. That's just all part of the process. And the more positively and productively we can approach every aspect of our life, and the more likely we're going to have long, happy lives. And even when our lives end on this planet, we have to wonder if there's something else, and just live life to be the best people we can, help as many people as we can, and enjoy all the moments we have in life. All right, thanks.